for being here at the Bard Graduate Center tonight. I'm Mary Ann LaMonica. I'm the Chief Curator and Associate Director of the Bard Graduate Center Gallery, and I'm here tonight to introduce our speaker, Paola Antonelli. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you to turn off your devices or put them on vibrate, however you'd like, and to say that we are here tonight in connection with the exhibition, the Interface Experience on View in the Gallery, which is a focus gallery project curated by Kimon Karamidis, who is the head of our Digital Media Lab and an assistant professor here. I also want to remind you to pick up our program brochure and to see if there are other programs in connection with this exhibition and with our main gallery exhibition, Fashioning the Body, that would interest you to come back to our public programs. And welcome to anyone who is watching us online. It gives me great pleasure tonight to introduce Paola Antonelli, Senior Curator in the Department of Architecture and Design and Founding Director of Research and Development at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Since her first exhibition for MoMA, Mutant Materials in Contemporary Design in 1995, Paola Antonelli has been on the cutting edge of design curation and design thinking. Her exhibitions and publications have explored a wide range of important and fascinating subjects. Thresholds, Contemporary Design from the Netherlands, Achille Castiglione, Design, Work Spheres, Safe, Design Takes on Risk, Design and the Elastic Mind, Standard Deviations, Types and Families in Contemporary Design, Talk to Me, Design and the Communication Between People and Objects, Born Out of Necessity, among many others. In addition to the publications that have accompanied these exhibitions, Paola has also produced Objects of Design in 2003, dedicated to the design objects in MoMAs collection, and one of my favorite, Humble Masterpieces, Everyday Marvels of Design in 2005, which highlights how good design facilitates and enriches our daily life. From her early years as a contributing editor at Domus magazine and as an editor of Abitare, Paola continues to enliven and enrich our understanding of design through her writing for many international publications. Paola Antonelli holds a master's degree in architecture from the Politecnico in Milano. From 1991 to 93, she was a lecturer at the University of California, LA, and has in the past few years also taught design history and theory at the Harvard Graduate School of Design and at the MFA programs of the School of Visual Arts here in New York. She is also a senior fellow with the Royal College of Art in London and received an honorary doctorate in design from Kingston University in London and from the Art Center College of Design, Pasadena. Paola has also lectured worldwide in settings ranging from peer conferences to global interdisciplinary gatherings, such as the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, and she has served on international architecture and design juries. Recently, she was the first keynote session speaker at the South by Southwest Interactive Conference. Among her other honors, Paola earned that of Design Mind, which is the Smithsonian Institution's National Design Award, in October of 2006. In 2007, she was named one of the 25 most incisive design visionaries by Time magazine. In 2011, she was inducted into the Art Directors Guild Hall of Fame, and she has just been awarded and will receive in 2 weeks' time the prestigious AIGA Medal, the highest honor in the design field, in which she is recognized as design's thought leader in chief. According to her own biography, Paola's goal is to insistently promote design's understanding until its positive influences on the world is fully acknowledged and exploited. Her recent online experiment, Design and Violence, launched for MoMA in collaboration with her co-curator, Jamer Hunt, has become a new paradigm for curatorial practice and communication. She is currently also working on several shows on contemporary design, on Design Bites, a book about foods from all over the world, appreciated as examples of outstanding design, and a book of her own essays, which she's collecting in one volume. I invite you to follow her on MoMA's blog, Inside Out, and on Twitter, and her handle is @CuriousOctopus. Tonight, Paola joins us to share her insights about interface design. So please join me in welcoming friend, neighbor, colleague, and visionary Paola Antonelli.
Mine, what a charming introduction, Marianne. I'm going to get back to you on that. But it's really quite great, and it's really, really a pleasure to be here with you tonight. I went to see the exhibition just before starting the reception and having a little wine and getting to meet you all, and I'm really impressed. I was asking Marianne, is the focus gallery going to become the tech gallery? But in the end, everything about design is about technology. It's very interesting. You know, we think that interfaces are the tech interlude in the program of the Bard Graduate Center, but even the design, the fashioning the body exhibition about silhouettes from past centuries is about technology. It's just that technology evolves and we evolve with it. And digital technology has revolutionized the way we deal with objects. You know, we've always had a rapport with objects. A rapport of like indifference sometimes, or of attachment, whether they were heirlooms or tools of everyday life. But ever since the digital revolution has happened, we have started to expect some sort of communication from objects. We want objects to really exchange something with us, even when they're inanimate. And that kind of exchange often happens, at least when there's a computer behind the object, through an interface, a face in between. Interfaces are extremely important. And since our job in a museum like MoMA, that is a museum for the masses, open to the whole world, is to explain the art of our time, it's very important for MoMA curators to tackle interfaces, because interfaces are the point of encounter between people and machines, because we all use interfaces dozens of times a day without even noticing. Forget your telephone. Just think of your MetroCard machine, which is one of my favorite interfaces in New York City, or your lousy ATM interface, you know, the bank ATM interface. What I would like, with the attention that we give at MoMA to interfaces, and that Bard is also given, is to let people have the critical tools to know when an interface is truthful, when an interface is trustworthy, and when an interface is good or bad, so that they can push back the way they've learned to do about so many other forms of design. So between you and me, interfaces are between people and machines, and they're extremely important. I mean, the movie Her was so amazingly effective in conveying the rapport that we can have with not even objects today, but simply with the interface itself. The interface is the door to a brand new world, a world that we inhabit, and sometimes even personalities that we have relationships with, as happens in this movie. There are many other examples of interfaces that are personalized. In Japan, there are so many ways to have an interaction with a machine, whether it's an interaction with a machine that is personified by the avatar that you choose, or whether it really goes beyond the avatar. So much so that interfaces have become also our door into the future world. What you're looking at right now is a quantum computer. I've recently been really fascinated with quantum mechanics, even though yesterday I was having a Skype conversation with a really prominent quantum physicist in MIT, that told me every time I hear lay people, I called myself civilian, he called me lay person. Every time I hear lay people tackle quantum mechanics as a metaphor, my heart sinks. And I said, you know, honey, mine too, when lay people tackle design as decoration. But I said, let's find a point of encounter. I said, I need you to help me not make a fool of myself when I try to use quantum mechanics as a metaphor. So we spent a lot of time on the phone, but truth is, quantum mechanics is very fascinating to normal civilian people like us because it embodies, or it doesn't embody yet, this mysterious state of ambiguity and ambivalence that is in between. You know, this quantum computer was photographed almost as a miracle. Quantum computers are so delicate because it takes nothing for the quantum state of ambiguity to be broken that they have to be kept completely insulated at very low temperatures. And there's this writer, Miranda Tremere, this is at the Infinity Machine, but Miranda Tremere is a writer that was really obsessed with the idea of seeing quantum computer. And she wrote this beautiful essay, like a speculative essay in the New Inquiry, explaining that she even started dating this guy that had access to a quantum computer at Yale. And, he kind of sniffed her out, so in the end she didn't get to see the computer. But she really was pursuing this computer. But what I liked about this essay is that she highlights what quantum theory has in store for people that want to figure out a new theory of design for the future. Delicate quirks and unpredictability, ambiguity, the efficacy of ambivalence or ambiguity. And here's the best. Ambivalence and ambiguity are smart collaborators that not only share their uncertainty, but sharpen it into a precise mode of communication. As far as I'm concerned, this is the future of design, even physical design, but definitely it is the kind of state that so many of us inhabit and that so many designers are working in when they work on interface and interaction design. Fascinating to no end. Interaction design is the design of the behavior. The interface, in a way, is the physical representation, even though it's not really physical, of interaction design. But it's about designing our behavior with machines. So it goes beyond the screen in some cases, and it goes to the psychology and the behavior behind it. And we have been looking at MoMA, at interfaces, for quite a long time. We've been collecting the physical computers themselves, hoping to be able to run the interfaces on them, as you have done here at Bard on the 4th floor. I was so happy to be using an old Mac, and I even started using the Palm Pilot. It was really quite hilarious to be able to do it again and feel the mouse with the sphere, the loaded sphere still in it. So we have some of the computers themselves, then we have started collecting video games, and we'll talk about them further. But we also have other forms of interfaces, like the Solari Udine panel that comes from the actual airport of Malpensa. It was kind of not discontinued. It was like put out of service a few years ago because it couldn't accommodate code sharing. So we found that out, and we called Malpensa, and we got the panel itself, and it's in the collection of MoMA. So all these different types of interfaces are fodder for the collection, and we look at them very carefully. Interestingly, as everything at MoMA, I was not the first to do it. I was not the first to pay attention. You'll be surprised. Marianne mentioned this book, Objects of Design, from a few years ago. Researching that book, I discovered that I am just following up in the steps of my predecessors, even when it comes to interfaces. This exhibition was by Karen McCarthy in 1990, and it was called Information Art Diagramming Microchips. The interface here is not the microchip itself. That would be a little facile, and a microchip is a tool and a processor. It's not an interface. The interface are the plotted, magnified drawings of the microchip that computer engineers used at that time to make sure that all the connections were made correctly. So what you see on the wall are not artistic printouts of the infinitely small microchips. They are functional plotted diagrams that were used by the computer engineers. So the interface, in a way, is the plotter itself. And Kara acquired these objects. She's now at the Cooper Hewitt. I'm sure that you know about her. She acquired these magnified diagrams a long time ago, and they are still on display to this day. Interfaces sometimes are part of the collection, and other times are a way to display the collection. We know that interfaces became really something commonplace in the late 1980s, and especially in the 1990s, when the World Wide Web became available to everybody. Incidentally, a parenthesis, just last weekend, I bumped into a TV show from a few years ago that some of you might really enjoy that's called Halt and Catch Fire. And it's the story of this fictional Dallas company in 1983 that wants to come out with the first portable laptop before IBM and before everybody else. And it's a real pushback to harking back to a different kind of interface era. But anyway, this is just a few years later, 1995, and it's the website for my first exhibition, Mutant Materials in Contemporary Design. It's also the first website for MoMA. Interestingly, at that time, there was no real website, not at MoMA, but in no museums. There were not many websites around, but there were few enough for me to know that I wanted one so bad. But MoMA didn't really know what a website was, therefore they gave me a budget of $315, which I used to take taxis back and forth to the School of Visual Arts, where a student taught me HTML, so I coded this monster myself. It's still available on the MoMA website if you want to go see it. But the reason why I'm showing it to you is because it introduced a new way to interface with exhibitions. This was never a way to mimic the exhibition, but in my mind, it was a way to store forever the checklist for scholars in the future to be able to access. And interestingly enough, it has happened that just a few years ago, somebody told me, thank God you had the checklist online and I could get to it. It was a scholar. So at the beginning was this idea of record, having a record that was accessible to all and not just in the archives of MoMA. Then, of course, with the evolution of the technology, the interface to the exhibition changed. To this day, I don't believe that one can replicate an exhibition online. So when I look at other examples, I always think that websites are something else. But we'll talk about it later because I'll get back to this idea of the online exhibition. The interface was explored many times also in shows after Mutant Materials. Marianne talked about the show Workspheres in 2001. Interestingly, Workspheres happened at the height of the dot-com boom and just before the dot-com bust. And it caught this weird moment in which people were finding new ways to work. It was the beginning of mobile workplaces. There was this idea, wireless technology was just around the corner. One could travel and work, but you had to dial in, and there was always a problem with the server, it would fall. So there was a lot of promise and a lot of frustration, but also a lot of optimism that was soon followed by a complete debacle. And it's really interesting because both in the world of software, in the world of hardware and furniture, there was really an explosion of enthusiasm for new modes of working and new modes of communicating. I don't know how many of you remember, but big companies like Herman Miller started special lines for the new dot-com offices that were not organized in cubicles, but rather in flowers and fireworks. Herman Miller had this line called Red that was really exciting, that was immediately closed after the dot-com bust. But so it was an interesting way also to interface physically with other human beings. And then I'm going to jump to Design in the Elastic Mind in 2008, because that's one of the first shows that enabled us to start officially acquiring visualization design, a very interesting form of interface design, and also other interfaces. So Design in the Elastic Mind was a show that tried to look at the relationship between design and science and to show how collaborations between designers and scientists, unmediated by technology and engineering, could be really beneficial to a different way to envision the future of the world. So seeing what happened when designers and scientists could work together without any filter or any insulation. And it was really interesting. It was organized by scale, and in particular, at the large scale that you see here, there were a lot of forms of interface design. Talk to Me, in a way, in 2011 was the exhibition that most celebrated interface design. And at that time, MoMA had already started acquiring interfaces with abandon. And you see here the MTA Machine that I love so much. We didn't acquire it yet, and I don't remember why. I think it was really difficult to get one. But I really love the interface of the MTA Machine because it just shows you what happens when you think of interfaces in context as opposed to thinking of something sleek like an iWatch, right? So you're in the subway in New York, and people from all over the world of all ages come and want to buy a Metro card. You better have big buttons. You better have like buttons that you can touch with a mitten, and if you make a mistake, it doesn't matter. Things that you can kind of knock. There's something really sturdy, like an MTA guy coming out of the tunnel, about this particular interface that I really like. And so it was part of the exhibition. Part of the exhibition were also very quirky interfaces that kind of changed your idea of what interface design is and cemented it in the minds of people that are not really used to the idea of interface design. These in particular were interfaces to speak with God. So behind the machine, there can be God, right? So you see on the left-hand side, Catholic nuns cloistered in northern England using for real this kind of altarpiece that is instead a ticker tape with news that are gathered from the BBC news site. They really use it. We have one in the collection that is a duplicate, but the nuns use it. And since cloistered nuns are truly cloistered and only get their news through some Vatican newspapers that have their own idea of news, this BBC ticker tape gives them topics to pray about. So the nuns themselves say that it keeps their prayers pertinent. And it's really quite interesting because it's a way to pray in a more effective fashion. On the right-hand side is a prayer mat by a Turkish student. It's a Muslim prayer mat that has an electroluminescent substrate and a compass module that lights it up when the carpet is turned in the direction of Mecca. Now, we all know where Mecca is. There's no need to have a compass telling you, but it's almost like a sign of religion kowtowing to technology that I find really quite poetic. And that's what I like about interface design. It has the ability to modulate different states of mind and also to accommodate rituals that other forms of design do not accommodate that easily. These are some of the interfaces that we acquired in the collection. From now on, I will use the interaction design and interface design a little bit in a synonymous way, even though there are slight differences, but we will use them as equal for the sake of this particular presentation. So the first interface design, interaction design that we acquired are John Maida's reactive books. You see them over there, and then also you see them installed with those iMacs that are mounted on the walls of the galleries at MoMA. In a way, you could say that the reactive books were the first apps for MoMA to acquire because they are self-contained programs. At that time, they were on floppy disks. Today, you would download them from the App Store. And they were making cute things like, a pendulum watch on your screen of the computer, or they would make your keyboard sound like an old typewriter. So it was kind of, poetic ways to interact with the machine. Then we acquired also Philip Worthington's shadow monsters that change your shadow in front of a light with a projector into monsters. So your Chinese shadows become dinosaurs, and they also make weird sounds. And then we also acquired interface designs like Toshio Iwai's Tenori On, which is a new musical instrument that can be tapped almost by making both a design and also a music. So there are many different forms of interfaces that we have acquired, and also interfaces that we have enacted. This is a beautiful interface, a beautiful new way to look at the beginning of abstract art. It's the exhibition Inventing Abstraction by my dear colleague Leah Dickerman, who decided to reconstruct the beginning of the 20th century, not by looking at the succession of isms, but rather by looking at a network of people to understand which people were more crucial knots for this network of idea sharing. And it's really interesting because you will find that some artists and poets and writers, not necessarily the best ones, were the ones that really made history happen. So there are different talents that can be had in the art world, and not all of them are necessarily artistic talents. So it was a new way to look at the history of modern art by using a different interface and a different type of interaction design. Mike, were you involved in this?
No.
No. yeah, because Mike Abink was until today the creative director of MoMA. So it's really, he just left, but he's involved in so much of what you see here today. So in this case, the interface design was a way to discover a brand new way to look at art. And that's what visualization design does many times. It really reveals new way to look at data and look at reality. What you see here are the galleries of MoMA right now. It's the current installation. And at the bottom, you see some of the objects that are in this installation that are interfaces. On the left-hand side are some drawings by Susan Kare. Susan Kare is the woman that designed the original icons for the Macintosh, so the smiling computer, the little bomb, all of them, the trash bin. And we can't really have those icons because Apple doesn't want to share them. But Susan was wonderful enough as to give us as a gift, as a joint gift between MoMA and SF MoMA, her notepads where she did the original notes and she had the first idea of the pixelated icons that then she presented to Steve Jobs. So we have a lot of the icons there on paper, and in a way they are the beginning of the interface. Then you see next to it, second from left, is the work of a really great Japanese designer, Yuri Suzuki, that designs this musical instrument that you can draw. So there's a little object that you pass onto a line that you draw with like intersections of colors, and the object reads the colors and you can make music that way. It's an interface. The third from the left is a wonderful interface that talks about the winds, that displays the winds, the current state of the winds over the United States. It's in real time. You can access it anytime, even now on your phone if you want. It's called Wind Map. And it shows the winds over the United States in the most poetic ways. If you were a wheat field, you really see the winds moving. And it's great to go in the archives and look at what happened during like terrible moments like Hurricane Katrina, because you really see the fury of nature that is visualized in a very effective way. And last but not least, on the very far right, is another type of interface for making music. It's a small synthesizer that is called Ototo, that is also in the collection of MoMA. So you see here 4 completely different forms of interface design in a row that show you some of the variety possible, but there's so much more. And you see it's a mixture. It's not all digital. One is on paper. It's the beginning of it. Another one is physical and digital. So interfaces come in many different quantum states, in other words. And how and why does MoMA collect interfaces? I kind of told you before, we are about the art of our time. That's in our mission. Alfred Bard Jr. said that MoMA is about collecting the art of our time. There's nothing more of our time than this kind of interface between people and machines. And that's why we decided to start acquiring video games. The acquisition of video games was a big deal for us, and we did it very seriously. In 2006, we had a 1.5-day symposium behind closed doors. We called upon some of the best minds of graphic and communication design in the world, from Emily King to Rick Poynter. Hillman Curtis was still alive at that time. Steve Heller was there. There were so many wonderful people. And we talked with them about the future of MoMA's collection when it came to so-called graphic design, which had mutated into communication design, but at MoMA it was still represented for 95% by posters. Now, posters have stopped being what they used to be in the past, where they were real means of communication. Right now, they've become almost vanity projects. So what's the art of our time? What's the design of our time when it comes to communication? We talked there about film titles, we talked about fonts, we talked about visualization design, and we talked about video games. So when the time came, we put together a panel of about 15, some game designers, experts, scholars. There are video game scholars indeed, and also people from IT at MoMA that are the biggest fans of video games. And we started selecting not only the list of the video games that we wanted, but also we started drafting the criteria. When you tackle a brand new space, how do you set the criteria so that they meet the same high standards of the rest of the collection? And also we started thinking of how to preserve and acquire these games. So that's the list of the games that we have now in the collection. And those are the old criteria or the old spaces taken from Siegfried Gideon, space, time, and architecture that applied to all types of design. When it comes to interaction design, you have to add aesthetics, of course, but also behavior. Behavior is what differentiates interaction design from anything else. You might tell me that any chair is designed also to instill a particular behavior, but there is much more control and freedom within limitations in interaction design. In a way, interaction designers almost play chess with you. They want to always be one move ahead. They want to, at the same time, predict what you'll do and let you be free. That's why this quantum design theory, however pedestrian, according to the quantum physicist from MIT, is very important for me, and I'll keep on working on it. So here are some of the games that we acquired. We decided to set these criteria that I'll talk to you about afterwards, and we proceeded to look at the video game space. Of course, there are some milestones that cannot be avoided, even though we had to avoid a few because Nintendo, pretty much like Apple, did not agree to some conditions that MoMA could not accept for the collection. But we have Atari, we have Sony, we have so many others, masterpieces, and you see here some of the ones that are on display right now, from Pong, of course, to Space Invaders, and then you see Tempest is my favorite one. I mean, you can go into more detail if you want. There are posts on the MoMA blog that let you really pause and think of all these different video games. One of the agreements we have with the companies is that we cannot let people play these video games online, of course, because that's part of their intellectual property, but you can play many of them in the MoMA galleries, not all at the same time. But video games, have different criteria, and I'm showing you here Kong that we did not acquire because it's a Nintendo game, but I'm using it in this slide because I want Nintendo to know every time I give a lecture that they're the only ones that are not in the collection. I do it on purpose. Anyway, so space is definitely a very important criteria when it comes to video games. Some of the best video game designers have a background as architects. Video games is a sequence of space. You need to really have a spatial imagination to be one step ahead of your player and also to really design a brand new reality. So space is one of the criteria for sure. And we see that space is very important in so many of these games. EVE Online, which is a game over there, is a game that is about building a new universe, and it's a collective. It's one of the so-called massive multiplayer online games, so it's played by many people at the same time, and it harnesses this kind of collective creativity to create new universes. And at the same time, you see the old version of it, the Magnavox Odyssey, which was instead very, very rudimentary, and it also involved putting an acetate screen onto your TV set, was able to convey the same spatial quality years before without being so realistic. And it's very important to be able to think of games as code. You see here some of the algorithms that recently went for auction. I don't know if you know, but Artsy had an auction of algorithms to benefit the Cooper Hewitt just a few weeks ago. And these two guys, Ben Gleitzman, and then I don't remember the name of his partner, who was an artist, a Latin American artist, went all over the United States looking for the original programmers and trying to get these original algorithms and kind of elevating them to the role of artworks. And interestingly, they have been considered art unto themselves. And we try as much as possible to get the original code to also be able to match the spatial quality as much as possible. Another criterion, of course, is time. Many video games have their own clock, their own inside clock, and some others instead are in real time, so they follow our seasons of the real life world. But time is important. How long is the experience? Is it a quick 5 minutes, as in Passage? Passage, I'll show you, is a beautiful game that lasts only 5 minutes. Or will it entail several hours of bliss, as in Dwarf Fortress, hours, months, years of bliss? So time behaves in a completely different ways in video games. And one of the video games that we want to acquire next is called Génération, so Generations. It's a French video games that's supposed to outlast you. It's going to live longer than you, and you'll have to put it in your will and leave it to somebody else to continue. So it's really interesting, like if you start thinking about it. This is Passage. Passage is a wonderful game. It lasts 5 minutes. And in 5 minutes, you are born, you go through life, and you die. You have to make several choices. You have to choose whether to have a partner or not. If you have a partner, life is longer and more complicated. And if you don't have a partner, you have more fun, it's easier, you die sooner. So it's really interesting. It's very philosophical, and there's no second level, there's no second life. When you're done 5 minutes, you go, and the next player comes in. These are, also in video games, it's like movies. There's like the commercial, big studio games, like, Nintendo, etc. And then there's the indies, like, this one, Jason Rohrer's Passage. Aesthetics is extremely important. When I say aesthetics, I'm not talking about prettiness. I'm talking about making the best of your aesthetic intentions within the technology at your disposal. This video game is fantastic. It's called Core War, and it's about, there's like some alien spaceship that you have to shoot and not be shot by. And you have to shoot all of that through that field of forces in the middle that sometimes deflects your bullets, sometimes, depending on how it moves, it can deflect it, it can power it up. So you have to really deal with this cloud of uncertainty. The funny thing is that interference is there because the microprocessor's capabilities did not allow for the whole screen to be used at the same time. So that's a limitation of the technology that the designer transformed into a strength of the game. I almost faint when I see things like this. I know I'm making it a little dramatic, but I find it one of the most beautiful ways to deal with the limitations of technology, make them into your strengths. Finally, behavior. Behavior is really important, and it's one of the criteria that made us discount and not include in the collection some absolute hits like Grand Theft Auto. So it's still the Museum of Modern Art. There's this little, it's still quite puritanical. It still is about building a brand new world, about design being for the good of mankind, of humankind, of womankind, and for a better future. So Grand Theft Auto, where you basically spend your time, crashing cars and hitting prostitutes with your Uzi or with your AK-47, is not really the kind of behavior that we wanted to document in MoMA. But that doesn't mean that everything has to be so Pollyanishly good. But we try to really think of the kind of behavior as a part of the design criteria. It's very interesting because when we announced that the video games were part of MoMA, the reaction by most of the public was extremely positive. I mean, when we posted on the blog, we got like 500 comments, and most of them were really enthusiastic. The ones that were critical were because we didn't include their favorite video game, and so they gave us this big list of video games. The only bad reactions were from very few art critics, kind of protectionist art people. In particular, Jonathan Jones from The Guardian. And that was quite hilarious because, nobody likes criticism. And of course, it hurts. We all have thin skins. And when I get a bad review, I really, I don't like it. But in this particular case, it was so embarrassing for him that I was instead reading it, and I was feeling, when you see somebody on a stage singing completely out of tune in front of hundreds of people, you're like, no, don't do it. Or I don't know if you've ever seen The Comeback with Lisa Kudrow, where you can't see the movie because it's too painful. So I was not in pain for myself. I was in pain for him because he was saying, oh, you cannot put Pac-Man next to Picasso. So it was this kind of dogmatic take on video games being low and Picasso being high. And who knows what Picasso was at his time? I mean, the ladies that founded MoMA because they wanted to show Picasso because he was not considered well enough elsewhere. So it was very funny because The Guardian itself published a rebuttal of its own critic, which that was the first thing that came out. Are video games art? The debate that shouldn't be. And then immediately thereafter, John Maeda, oh no, where is John? I'm missing a slide. It doesn't matter. John Maeda published a post in in Wired saying, oh yeah, absolutely, video games are art. So it started this big debate. And the funny thing is that the New Republic published to me the stupidest critic of it all. It says that it's a fascinating debate, but the answer to the above question, are video games art, put bluntly is, no, video games aren't art because they are quite thoroughly something else, code. Oh yeah? So Picasso is not art because it is simply something else, oil paint? You know, it's just really so funny to misunderstand the tool for the result, the means for the goals. And that gave me the idea to always explain to people that video games are designed where the material is not wood or glass or ceramic, but it is code. And code is extremely important. Oh, here is John. He just went after, but he had done the same. And see, he had done, John Maeda, video games belong in the MoMA. The funny thing is that in the 1930s, these loans from foreign countries to MoMA were blocked by customs at the US, entering the US, because customs said, oh, these are not art. Right? So in a way, it happens in every epoch. And I like the fact that when new mediums or also new dimensions of life come about, there always needs to be a debate on what is art and what isn't. So fascinating stuff. And these are some of the video games that we want to acquire next. You know, you see they change from, that's a video game on the top right that is about immigrating into the United States, and the video game at the bottom is a war video game, but instead of being the soldier and shooting everybody as usual, you're somebody trying to survive in a city that is being bombarded. So it really is, what's fascinating about video games, once again, if you look at the idea of behavior, is that they enable you to inhabit different shoes and different lives, and that's really what we like. And this is how MoMA, you know, I was telling you that it's also about storing and preserving the video games. We try to get the real code. This is Ben Fino-Radin, who's a great digital conservator at MoMA, published this post in Inside Out just 2 weeks ago, explaining how MoMA preserves its digital archives, whether they are archives of the collection or whether they are archives of the actual artwork. So it really has a whole infrastructure and a whole lot of thinking behind it. So I was talking to you about visualization. This is a better view of the wind map, and I really invite you to go and see it live. Visualization design, you know, visualization is about creating an interface between our little limited minds and the enormous amount of data that is available everywhere in the country about any kind of topic. You know, we're just human beings. There's just so much we can get. And visualization design is a way to not really simplify, but bring complexity down so that we can understand it better. And it's also a way to highlight certain points. So visualization design is always functional. In this particular case, it's for the wide public, even though it's based on data coming from the National Meteorological Institute. In other cases, like for instance these kind of visualizations, it's a way to explain complex events in politics. The one in the middle is a video that is a visualization of the crisis of credit from 2008. I mean, how do you explain collateral debt obligations? I usually talk about meatloaves, but this visualization works a little better than my meatloaves. And then, you know, digital attack maps and maps that show disparity and injustice in inner cities in the United States. Visualization designers tackle them all. And very often visualization design is a tool for propaganda. It's about making things that are either invisible or not very visible all of a sudden in everybody's face, as is the $1 million block map on the bottom right, which shows that in many cities in the United States there are blocks for which the government spends more than $1 million a year just to keep some of the people that inhabit that block either in prison or in halfway houses. So it's almost a way to highlight a sort of entropy that's connected to financial waste, you know. So it's quite interesting to see this red over black on the territory of Brooklyn. So visualization design in other cases, it's not at all for dissemination. This is the work of Ben Frey. It's a little washed out, so you can't see it very well. It's so fine. But Ben Frey comes from the MIT Media Lab, and he works a lot with scientists. He's a great visualization designer because his work is also devastatingly elegant in the end. It's not only effective, it's also elegant. But what you see here, for instance, on the right, bottom right, is a visualization of protein homology. I don't even know exactly what it is, but so he works for scientists to help them visualize their data for scientific papers. So it's aimed at a different kind of target audience. We are looking at more visualization design to acquire. This is, well, I Want You to Want Me is the visualization that we already have at MoMA. But I don't know if you've ever seen We Feel Fine. You can also see that online. It's a way to look at how people all over the world are feeling at any time by looking at the iterations of the root feel in all the blogs and in all the private posts in the world. So these are visualization designs that are poetic. They're about rendering humanity, not conveying any kind of hard data. But they are nonetheless revealing of the way we live. And even though they might not be exact and completely trustworthy, they give an overlook and a bird's eye view of humanity all over the world. The bird's eye view is something that we've always dreamt of. I was just talking to somebody about an exhibition that's now happening at the Museum of the Moving Image, where basically you can fly over Manhattan like a bird using a virtual reality helmet. I'm definitely going to go do that. But this is a way to fly around the Talmud, around all the old Jewish scriptures by using an interface that was developed so early as in 1994 by Muriel Cooper, a great graphic designer, and her students at the MIT Media Lab. So visualization design really carries you in a different space. Other forms of interfaces sometimes are even more amazing. This is a new way to design dresses, and actually that dress is on display now at MoMA. Of course, you're all familiar with 3D printing, and you know that with 3D printing, the final user, the end user, can customize at her whim many different things, including the way the dress fits. But what is amazing about this interface is that it also allows one to 3D print the dress folded. I don't know if you know it, but 3D printing costs more as you have a bigger object because the cost is proportional to the size of the vat of resin. So the smaller the object, the more affordable it is. And you see, a dress, if printed as a dress, would be extremely costly. But if folded and printed in this much space, it becomes much more affordable. Still too expensive, but we'll get there soon. So in this case, the interface that is available to everybody enables one to customize the dress over one's picture of the body, and then send it to a 3D printer for it to be prepared. So you see, the interface enables you not only to visit and to watch and to play games, but also to make and to send for it to be made nearby. More interfaces that we will soon acquire are apps. We've already acquired some. I'm going to stop it because otherwise the music is going to distract us. We've already acquired, as I mentioned to you, the reactive books by John Maida, and we've acquired also Bjork's Biophilia, and we're going to acquire more of these interfaces. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with one of the first apps that were in the App Store and that became really famous, which is Elements. It shows all the elements of the periodic tables and more. And we're looking actively for more art of our time, more apps to include in the MoMA collection. We're also looking, believe it or not, at Max Headroom, which is a fake interface, because we all thought that it was a real interface and a real digital creation, and instead it was an actor pretending to be a digital creation. It doesn't get any more meta than that. We'll get there. This is what MoMA looks right now from the outside, not the CC there, but the power on button. Part of interface design is also the way you interact physically with the machine when you turn it on. So the power on button was very important for us to acquire. And the @ sign is another interface, if you wish, because it's the connection between the name of the person and the server where the email resides. So it links the live being with the digital universe and really directs it into the right direction. Also, we have just acquired the Creative Commons logo, which is another, not an interface, but definitely a consequence of interfaces being available. It's a new way to deal, well, not that new anymore, but it's a way to deal with copyrights that has become so important and crucial an issue right now. So these are all acquisitions in the, oh, and also you can see the Google Maps pin over there. These are all acquisitions in the MoMA collection that document the importance of interface design, even though they're not all interfaces themselves. But slowly but surely, we've been able, working together with conservators and with our colleagues, to enter the world of digital technology into the museum collection, including also a lot of fonts, of digital fonts. Those also came from the 2006 symposium that I mentioned to you, and we started acquiring digital fonts rather than physical fonts, because in a way, they're kind of easier to acquire. But also, it's a wonderful selection that we have and that we're going to augment. Interfaces are also extremely important when it comes to extending the capabilities of people that have limited action and agency in the world. You see here, very often, great discoveries start with a person that has a very pointed need, and then they become available to everyone. Many people in the design world use OXO and the good grips as an example. The good grips were invented by Sam Farber, who was the owner of OXO for many years, for his wife, because she had a wrist impairment and she wasn't able to use knives. So he adapted this new elastomer that could be molded to have this kind of little wings. He adapted it to make this new handle that made his wife able to cut an apple, and all of a sudden there was a brand new company and an advance for all of us. In a way, the iWriter project could be considered like that. It was made by a group of hackers and artists and engineers around I-Beam in New York for a graffiti artist from LA that you see there in his hospital bed. His tag name is Tempt1, who is completely paralyzed because of Lou Gehrig disease. So this artist, this graffiti artist that in the 1980s was so famous, and he was part of the graffiti group that was using calligraphy in a masterful way, was blocked in a hospital with no hope anymore to do what he liked most, which is to tag buildings all over Los Angeles. Well, these hackers, this group of hackers, just took a pair of very cheap glasses, a computer camera, and then prepared this whole software to enable Tempt1 to tag a building in downtown Los Angeles from his hospital bed using technology they had developed. First of all, the camera on the glasses, and then that technology also was connected to a computer, a laptop in downtown Los Angeles, and a machine that tagged the building using laser. So it was kind of a mediated way to go about it, but at least in the part that was about following the eyeball movement, it was a $60 operation. Now, if you are completely paralyzed right now and you don't have enough money, you have to have a person with an alphabet on a piece of paper, and the person keeps pointing at the letter, and then you kind of move your eyeballs when the letter is the right one, unless you have enough money to buy a device that is about $10,000. With this open source software and the kind of very easy hardware and very cheap hardware, anybody with that kind of impairment can have access to a technology that enables a much easier, of course not optimal, but form of communication. So interface design is extremely powerful. It's not only a made-up filter, it's also open to the open source movement, and it can really open up many more possibilities. These are just some examples of what interface design is about. What I would like very much to have happen is for places like the Museum of Modern Art, of like Bard. When I was up on the fourth floor today, there was an elderly couple that was trying to tackle this idea of the Kinect the Microsoft Kinect. So they were in front of the Kinect and they were moving their hands, and then they moved to the Macintosh computer. Paradoxically, they were having a much easier time with the Kinect than with the Macintosh. That's really what's happening that I find fantastic, that as interface design evolves, the technology more and more is disappearing, and it's becoming more seamless as a way to use our own body and our own perception the way we've done for millennia. And that's what the greatest interface designers do. They make it really natural for us to inhabit a world that is full of possibilities, of quantum possibilities, I hope, and that is there for the taking. The only limit and the only obstacle that we still have is the technology itself. Designers will make it disappear. Thank you very much. I know that, this is kind of an intimate setting, so those who want to leave because it's 7:34, please do. But if anybody has questions or comments, we can make it really choral. Hmm?
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
As a curator.
As a curator, yeah.
Question. And since I'm no longer collecting at the Bard Graduate Center, but can you explain to us how you collect? I mean, what does it mean to collect the @ symbol?
Well, the @ symbol was a
CC
really
symbol,
interesting.
or-
The @ symbol was the extreme. The CC, the Creative Commons symbol was, we were dealing with real people. There's a Creative Commons Foundation, there's a designer, so we talked to them, and of course they license it to us, no problem. So it's about having a relationship with the foundation. The @ sign was much more interesting because it's in the public domain, so it doesn't belong to anybody. So in a way, it's impossible to collect. You cannot acquire it, take it out of the world and make it yours like you do with so many other objects. So I always say that more than acquiring it, we anointed it. But after all, our job is to be, it's an educational institution, so it's not about possessing, but rather it's about showing. We possess in order to show, right? We don't possess in order to possess. So if something cannot be had, well, we can still show it. So what I always say is that it's as if a butterfly was flying by and casting a shadow on the wall, and we acquired the shadow. And anybody can have it. And the funny thing is that when people call and ask us for images of the @ sign, like they do when they call to ask for images of other objects in the collection, we just tell them it's on the keyboard, you just press it. And they're like, what? And I'm like, yeah. And if you want to use a font, American typewriter is the closest one to the one that, the teletype that was used in 1971 by the electronic engineer that invented the email program and that adopted it. So it's really funny, it's very meta, and I so enjoy this kind of game of thinking what acquiring, anointing, showing, curating means. When it comes to the video games, sometimes you acquire the relationship with the company. Because when it's something like EVE Online, which is a game that is alive, and we don't know if it's going to stay alive forever, because they have a life cycle too. It's alive, you cannot acquire the game, so you acquire the relationship with the company and with the community. So on display, when we show it, it's a day in the life of EVE Online that was filmed by the community. So it's really fascinating. It's a different way of acquiring, and it's not only the Department of Architecture and Design. We're looking into that for many other departments, because also mediums right now are used interchangeably. So it's fascinating. You might want to read that post by Ben Fino-Radin. I mean, it's a little technical, but it's great. And there's a post also about the outside. Yeah.
On that note, I wonder how do you approach actually the relationship of the medium game, so to say, to its original apparatus, or kind of
to the hardware
it was conceived on, and also to display technology.
Spoken like a real curator of Nandrum Peck. Yeah, it's interesting because we made a decision not to show the hardware, with the exception of the Magnavox Odyssey. And the reason for that is that we didn't want to have any nostalgia interfering with the experience of the interface and the interaction design. Because very often when video games are shown, they're shown on the original arcade cabinets, and you immediately are thrown into this whole, it becomes very dated, and we didn't want that. We wanted, for instance, I love Tempest. To me, Tempest is a video game that is endlessly timely and gives you thrills. You know, the space is so incredible. If you put it in the arcade cabinets, you immediately know when it was made. And instead, if you don't, it could have been made today by people like Cory Arcangel or artists that kind of mimic the old games, because it's really quite incredible. So I didn't want that dated quality, even though we have acquired most of the hardware. We just keep it in the storage.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
What are your plans for 50 years from now? You know,
I know.
maintaining the, you know, the maintenance and the technology is evolving. Like in 10 years, 15 years, who's gonna machines break? How does
No, that's Ben's problem. No.
who's thinking about that? Because I think it's pretty interesting.
No, we've been thinking about it from the start, and that's why we try to get the source code. You know, like for instance, for Passage, for some of the indie games, we're able to get the source code. Of course, companies like Atari, Nintendo, forget about it. They don't want to give you the source code. But what we try to argue with them is we try to tell them we're much safer than they are. I mean, there are so many video games that have gone lost. I've been after this video game called Mule that cannot be found anymore. The original designer, the inventor died. It's Atari, but Atari doesn't own it. I'm trying to talk to the children, but they're, you know, they don't really know what to do. They don't know what the floppy disks are. So MoMA is a much safer place, right? So when it comes to Susan Kerr and the icons, we have MoMA and SF MoMA have inherited like 50 floppy disks, and we're going through them right now, and we're trying to download whatever is in the floppy disks into this safe repository. So those machines that you've seen are the physical repository, but we try to really get the source code, because that's the one that hopefully, at least for a few decades, you'll be able to migrate from one platform to the other.
It's interesting. I mean, I recently talking to Raj, you know, he's the curator at the film department, and some of the films they have, the machines that play these films are soon to be gone, and the parts are gone, and so they have a, you know, something to worry about in the future. So that's why they want to digitize everything. But it is interesting to me that at some point you can't play that film like you used to play it.
Oh my God, now Tupac, for instance, it's like
will be
really a
gone.
problem. You're right, because of the television set.
Import some Cubans and they'll make it go for 50 years.
Huh?
Import some Cubans
Oh
and
yeah.
they'll let them go for 50 or 60 years like they do with their cars.
I know, no, it's terrible.
Are you familiar with, there's a big thing like online, like emulators, like
Oh yeah, no, we do that
Atari
too.
emulator and
That's the second.
Nintendo emulator.
That's the second choice. So
Right.
the first choice is the source code. If that's not possible, emulation.
There's all these ROMs, so
Yeah,
it's like
yeah.
they took the source code and then
Of
they
course.
converted it, so you can play it on any computer now.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think that's a great way of preserving.
Actually,
These collections of
in
videos.
terms of this exhibition, the interface experience, unfortunately, Kimon couldn't be here tonight, but he, you know, was adamant not to run those 5, you know, well, not all 5, but he didn't want to use emulators.
Yeah,
So
I know.
That's
I know.
why,
I
that's
know.
behind
You
the
don't want to.
creation of the Commodore
But
platform.
sometimes you
and
have
stuff.
to.
No, so, but that was part of his curatorial program, is that he really wanted to make
I
it as
understand.
and, but it's, you know, obviously it depends on the setting and what your goal is, so.
Yeah, for instance, Tetris, you know, we wanted the original one, and we found the original designer, Alexei Pajitnov. He made the emulator for us, so hey, so that's safe.
Yeah.
Right now, it's a little bit like design when you have the same chair manufactured by the same manufacturer, but it's interesting, yeah.
I have sort of another kind of museum practical question, but when you're collecting things like the Susan Kerr icons, while they're an architecture and design object, they're really like works on paper. How does that work? Like when you're working in like a cross?
Oh, we have a lot of works on paper in architecture and design, all the architectural drawings, all of the all of the posters. So there's a paper conservator. There are several paper conservators, and we work with them.
And that's true for things like when you're collecting code that's kept within architecture and design, as is like the Magnavox.
You know, departments are gateways,
Right.
right? Then it's one collection. So we're gateways in that we take responsibility, we develop expertise, we find the money for certain things, but then they become part of the whole collection. So especially when it comes to conservation, there's one department of conservation. I mean, the drawings department has a conservator that works there most of the time, but he comes and helps us when we need it also.
Yeah, actually, going beyond what you were just talking about, but in the realm of architecture itself, how is MoMA dealing with collecting now the work of architects that are no longer on paper?
We're collecting digital files. Yeah. We're collecting the digital files and sometimes the 3D printed objects. Well, we try to also get at least one of the objects, whether it's a drawing or whether it's a 3D printed object. But we also acquire the digital file because also these objects are much more perishable. You know, it's very funny. They're not as sturdy as the old good old wood. You know? So that's what we try to do. It's really interesting. Go ahead.
Is there a limit to the kind of interfaces you're interested in keeping, like mundane things like old Microsoft Word interfaces?
It's still an art museum,
Yeah.
so the limit is aesthetic quality. You know, so the old Word, I wouldn't acquire that because that's more for the computer museum. I mean, if I were working at the computer museum, I would acquire it in a second. So you just need to know who you are in a way. I've been trying to get the first GUI. But for the reasons that Marianne was talking about before, the right way to show it would be on the original Xerox Star computer from 1981. But first of all, there's only 2 left. The people at Xerox don't know where the program is, that lost it. It would have to be an emulation. And also, if I had the original computer, it would break down all the time. So it's a series of, the limits are the aesthetics and the design quality, and also sometimes the technology really is a problem. Or like Space War, there's only 2. Space War is the first video game, 1957. There's one at the Computer Museum down in Mountain View, wherever it is. And another one is, I don't know if it's at the Museum of the Moving Image all the time, or if it was just there for an exhibition. But yeah, can't be had.
I wonder also, I will be kind of coming back to the question of preservation a little bit. I'm very interested because in the issues of behaviors, and you were pointing to one of the possible definitions of it in relation to participatory, interactive, or responsive media. But I wonder whether you might have thought about the collection of, I don't know, interviews with the users of these technologies.
Oh yes, we do that.
And
Yeah.
how, or yeah. I would
Oh,
love
thank
to
you
hear
for
your
bringing it
version.
up. It's very important. I forgot to say. Whenever we collect either an interface, because we did it also with John Maida, but also a video game, we collect the, if we can, the source code, an emulation, we film people playing, review the original coder for hours. So it becomes super redundant. We also try to get the original sound, so it's this whole battery of capturing the video game, which is quite crazy.
This is very interesting because it parallels the kind of tendency in, preservation of computer-based arts in general.
Yeah.
And lots of projects are going on.
And always we feel very insecure, like it can disappear. I don't know if it's a psychological fear that's connected to the fact that it's digital and not physical, but it's very funny. It's like you have to be super redundant. Oh, you do. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming. This is
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you.